Bonjour. Bonjour, good morning everyone. Bienvenue à l'événement d'aujourd'hui. We're about to begin, so if everyone could take their seats. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is located on the traditional and ceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. Welcome elders, partners, President Kochak, President Clayton, and Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations, Minister Marc Miller. I would like to invite Elder Commanda and Elder Surkor to begin this event in a good way with opening prayers.
Good afternoon. Gwe kakina. Miigwech kibijaye goma nongum pijaje goma nishnabe ki o mama weneniwag. Bonjour à tous, mon nom c'est Claudette Commanda, je suis une femme algonquin de la Première Nation de Kitagan-Zibi. Bienvenue ici au territoire non cédé de la Nation algonquin. I'm always honored and proud to welcome brothers and sisters from coast to coast to coast. Welcome to this beautiful homeland, the homeland of my ancestors, the homeland of my people, the Algonquin people. Welcome, welcome, brothers and sisters. We're gathered here today for an announcement. And anytime we come together, anytime it's related to communities, to people, to children, we must always acknowledge our ancestors, those loved ones who have come before us. We must always acknowledge our communities, our relatives, and we must always begin in that good way, to give thanks to the higher power for bringing us here, to thank those ancestors for their wisdom and knowledge. So to you, my brothers and sisters, I ask that we put our minds, our hearts, our spirit, and our voice together, and we offer a prayer and we give thanks to the great mystery as we say, Chi miigwej, miigwej, kishiminado, miigwej, kinakego. Miigwej. Miigwej kokomista pekizis, miigwej mishomis kizis, miigwej jojoeki. Nibuksendam gishiminado, nibuksendam mashkawiziwin, nibuksendam chiminotagaziwin, nibuksendam minopomadzwin. Chi miigwej gishiminado, miigwej onje, kin zagiyedwin. We come together, Creator, in this good heart. We acknowledge you for your kindness, and we thank you for all of your blessings. Creator, this prayer that is offered for this announcement that is being shared here today, we acknowledge our relatives in the spirit world, and we acknowledge our ancestors, and we give thanks for their guidance and their love. And Creator, it is my prayer for all who are here that good words will be spoken, good words will be heard, good words will be respected. And Creator, we pray for your strength and we thank you for your strength. We acknowledge the children in our communities as we acknowledge our elders and we acknowledge our grandmothers and our grandfathers, and we give thanks to all of life. Miigwej kinakego. And we thank you, Creator, for blessing us with the greatest gift that you've given all of our people, love. Miigwej kishiminado. Miigwej ni jenwan daganag, miigwej kokomisug, miigwej mishomsug, miigwej onji kiniwin, emiyawin. We thank you, Creator, for hearing our heart and our prayer. Miigwej. I'd like at this time to welcome my brother and elder David to come forward to give his prayer, to give his blessing. Chi miigwej nichkiwedo gashishinishnabe miigwej.
Unukatsak. Unukatsaino katika. Good afternoon, everyone. Kawianak tamani katawa maublumi unuka. I'm very happy to be here, and also thank you for inviting me. For those who've been up to Eastern Arctic or Nunavut, Nunavik, Nunatsiavut, the whole Inuit Nunangat is just getting ready for spring throughout Eastern Arctic, whether it's 5 people or several thousand people. skidoo races, drum dances, square dances, and from baby to elders like me. And I worked with young people all my life, at least from 78 as a teacher, mainly on working with drumming, drum making, and sharing Inuit history in Nunavut, Nunavik, and Nunavut, northern Quebec and Labrador. Many kids would sort of recognize me half and half. Said, I know you, we know you. Didn't really connect the face and the name. I would give them a hint. Little drummer boy? Yeah, yes. So that's quite all right. So I don't mind being called little drummer boy. I've been I heard worse name before, so this drummer boy is good. I also like to share just a few moments of drum dancing from Eastern Arctic. So here it is. Thanks again for inviting me. I will demonstrate my drumming on that corner here. Going once, going twice.
Thank you very much, Elder Commander and Elder Sorko. I would like now to invite Minister Miller, Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations, for his opening remarks.
Kwekwe Ulukut. Hello, bonjour. Je tiens à souligner à mon tour notre présence sur le territoire traditionnel non cédé du peuple algonquin Anishinaabe. Thank you, Elder Sergo and Commander, for your opening prayers and getting us off in the way we should. I'm pleased to share the podium today with President Kotiak and President Clayton, and we'll turn to them in a couple moments. Il y a quelques instants, j'ai prononcé un discours lors de la 9e conférence annuelle de la Coalition pour les ententes sur les revendications territoriales, où l'on discute du pouvoir transformatif des traités modernes. At that conference, we spoke of relationships and renewal, and we spoke of rebuilding and supporting self-determination. These elements are at the core of the changes we're introducing through a new policy, Canada's Collaborative Modern Treaty Implementation Policy. It is a new way of working together and was co-developed with the Land Claims Agreement Coalition and Modern Treaty partners, as well as with the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee. And I want to thank everyone and take a moment to recognize them for the ongoing partnership efforts, determination, and forcefulness that got this across the finish line on this really, really important matter. It's more than a matter. I think to summarize things for people that perhaps aren't familiar with this, there are about 24 communities across the country since the 1970s that have taken a leap of faith with Canada and wanted to embody their relationship in what we call generally modern treaties, whether it's embodying that relationship in the way that we want to see it go forward or to get out from under the Indian Act, which is an oft-talked-about topic in some cases, but it is one that weighs heavily, I think, on this country. And we call these generally, we put them together and call them modern treaties. They all have different iterations. They all are a reflection of a policy at the time which may not have been perfect and still probably is not perfect. But what we haven't done is work together with communities, these 24 communities, on a consistent basis to come up with a modern policy so that we can keep and continue to keep putting our best foot forward. And more importantly, making sure that the public service, which is the permanent independent face of the Government of Canada, is building a muscle memory to behave in the way that partners here today in the room beside you expect them to behave. And that hasn't always been the case. So we recognize that standing up and making principled statements sometimes is difficult. Oftentimes it's easy. But you can't walk away from them, and you need people to put teeth to them. And I think that's what we're talking about today, moving from principle to actual on-the-ground policy and the implementation of that policy. Nous pensons que cette politique va faire évoluer la culture et le processus décisionnel, comme je l'ai dit en anglais, au sein du gouvernement fédéral. Il y a encore beaucoup de travail à faire pour soutenir les peuples autochtones sur cette voie de l'autodétermination, mais il s'agit d'un pas en avant significatif avec les communautés qui ont été de l'avant-garde de l'autodétermination au cours des 45 dernières années. Canada is committed to meeting these obligations with our partners in that spirit. The Prime Minister will meet, as part of this policy, face-to-face with leaders of the modern treaties in the coming months to discuss how we can be better treaty partners, be better partners generally, and ensure that we live up to the commitments that we've made and deliver on our shared and common priorities. We'll also establish an intergovernmental policy circle, as we've said almost jokingly, where the smart people will be sitting at the table to help connect and communicate with each other on a regular basis. And we'll ensure that there is an oversight of the Government of Canada now and in the future, so that importantly Canada is held accountable for living up to the obligation under these particular treaties. We'll set out to do this last part over the next 6 months. It will be co-developed work that will establish a mechanism that strengthens independent oversight and accountability in our modern treaty relationship. We will continue to ensure that the agreements support and uphold our obligations towards children and families in particular, which is at the center and should be at the center of all our work. Nous apporterons des changements concrets, comme le fait de remettre le contrôle de la fiscalité entre les mains des gouvernements autochtones. Les traités modernes sont des documents vivants, il faut l'admettre, et ils continueront d'évoluer et de changer en fonction des partenaires. Canada will continue to collaborate with our modern treaty partners to ensure that we're living up to the spirit and intent of the treaties. And that's something that, as part of this policy, we will do today. Miigwech, Kuyanamik, merci, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I would now like to invite President Luki Kochiak of Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated to offer her remarks.
Nuksakut. Kuvia sudlarik pungatavani ilaw kataw yun nakama naruna sitilgo minister giyaw yu inuragi kuno kuvia nang ilaw kataw yun nakama. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here as one of the co-chairs for the Land Claims Agreement Coalition, and I'm very pleased to be here with members of the representatives of modern treaties. This is a momentous day, and I will take this opportunity to commend Minister Miller for moving forward on arriving at this day where an implementation policy is announced. I recall last year at our Land Claims Agreement Coalition leaders meeting, Minister Miller was there and was attentive to the issues that we raised. And although there have been different implementation tools that have been implemented by the federal government over the years, and we still have ideas about, for instance, the Modern Treaty Implementation Review Commission, I think it doesn't take away from the fact that today is an important day, that the implementation policy will have a positive, we're very hopeful, a positive impact. This year, 2023, marks 20 years since modern treaty holders came together in 2003 and agreed to work together to advocate for common issues that we face in terms of implementing modern treaties. In addition, I am from Nunavut, and this year marks 30 years since the Nunavut Agreement was signed. And I know for a fact that each time a modern treaty is agreed upon, there is lots of hope in our communities that things will be better. And I can attest that there's a lot of frustration and mistrust when implementation doesn't occur. And so much of the work that Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated has spent over the last 30 years, although there have been things that have been implemented, there's much more work needed to implement things. And I believe that is the same experience that modern treaty holders face across this country. So we are appreciative that we have this policy, and we hope that it means that we spend less time educating the federal public service about the shared agreements that we have all agreed to, that we can start at a point where there's already awareness and commitment to live up to the obligations outlined in our agreements, our shared agreements, so that we can move forward. And we are also very appreciative that there is commitment, a 6-month commitment to work on co-developing what a review mechanism may look like in terms of implementing our modern treaties. This is about relationships, and trust is built over time through action. And I dare say that having Minister Miller join our meeting last year and now joining it this year with something concrete moves us forward in bounds towards achieving trust. And we hope and we expect that we will continue to collaborate for the betterment not only of our family members and community members in our territories, but for all of Canadians. Ko yan nami.
Thank you very much, President Kochirk. I would like now to invite President Eva Clayton of Nisga'a Lissom's government to provide her remarks.
Thank you. My name is Eva Clayton. I'm the president for the Nisga'a Nation. Simgigat, Sigaram Hanak, Scuba Wilset, Gun Scuba Gisk, chiefs, matriarchs, honored guests, distinguished guests, Minister Marc Miller, my co-chair, President Iluki Kotirk, my fellow leaders, and colleagues of the Land Claims Agreements Coalition. It's a very significant day for the LCAC. A lot of work has gone into what has resulted today. And it was incredibly exciting and happy to see the youth, our future leaders, honoring the past to build a better future, because it's important that we walk with our youth. It gives me great pleasure and privilege to speak to you today and to reflect on the 20-year journey of the LCAC to work towards the betterment of implementing our treaties. No one said it was going to be an easy job. As First Nations, we didn't know what to expect as we went into the implementation of the treaties. Neither did the federal government. So it was a little bit of on both sides with the modern day treaties faced with the challenges that we had been faced with for 20 years. I say 20 years because that's the life of the LCAC. The Nisga'a Treaty has been in place for 23 years now. Our leaders of the past had the foresight. They had the foresight in recognizing what we had to do to move forward to implement the treaty with our treaty partner, the signatory to the agreements, because it was important. The Nisga'a Nation has been faced with numerous challenges, and I'm so happy that the implementation policy is now on board, and we look forward to the day that we can begin the work on it. You've heard my colleague and you've heard Minister Miller speak about a 6-month timeline to get a work plan, if you will, in place, and I think it's important. I'm happy with the 6-month timeline to get that work plan in place because it's important. Too often we put in place policies and put them on the shelves. So I'm really happy with the timelines that have been reached. And since the creation of the coalition, the primary objective has been to lobby the federal government to adopt a modern treaties implementation policy. It was never ever lost on the part of the LCAC. We hammered home, we continued with the work, whether it was the past leaders or whether it was the current leaders. And we have a lot to be thankful for. All of our technical teams from all of the nations, the modern day treaties, the staff of the LCAC, Patty Black and her group, a lot of work went into it. This certainly is an incredible achievement and one that we wish to celebrate, truly celebrate with all of those who contributed and to celebrate with Canada. We've always had relationships with Canada, always. And we always walked with dignity. And we walked with pride with Canada because that's what Indigenous people do. We walk with pride and we walk with respect. For the implementation policy, it's not the end of the road. It's a framework to build upon relationships with the federal government. It's a framework to improve relationships as we move forward to implementing the modern day treaties. This week, the coalition is hosting its 9th annual conference, but we've been here discussing the issues for 20 years. Not necessarily myself, but we've had Nisga'a leadership of the past that have contributed to this. Sadly, some of them have passed on to the happy hunting ground. We have one with us here today, Kevin McKay from Lackaldap, Nisga'a village of Lackaldap, and Edmund Wright from the Nisga'a village of New Iance was not able to attend this week because of the, I should say, all of the cancellations by Air Canada. And it was a very difficult journey getting some of our people here. We are very excited about the work that's going to face us, Minister. And it will be done collaboratively. We have many young, intelligent, and vibrant and eager people, youth, who want to work towards improving the way of how we've been implementing the treaty. And it's for the future of all of our children, of all of the Indigenous people. And I want to thank Minister Miller. Thank you, Miller. Oh, sorry, Mark. Sorry about that, Minister. I wish to thank you for championing this initiative. You know, you did a lot of work with the Land Claims Agreements Coalition, and you've taken it through the machinery of government. Thank you very much. And You've brought it to the machinery of government to have it adopted. And this is what the good news is today. And with our respective modern-day treaties, it is our desire that the full spirit and intent of our agreements are eventually achieved. Because right now, we spend a lot of our time getting that work, getting that recognition from our federal treaty partner to begin the work on putting in place this much-needed implementation policy. And it's the whole of government that's going to take this through with us. And I think it's important that we look at how we're going to roll out this implementation policy. How are we going to implement the implementation policy is really a question that we all are faced with as modern-day treaties. And for our technical people, I think it's important as we work together to build a work plan collaboratively with federal government on how we're going to walk forward with this new policy and to breathe life into that policy so that it's working for all of the modern-day treaties. The other area that we must, and I feel it's important to address, is that we must also address our languages, our official languages that are enforced and should be mandatory. A lot of the many indigenous languages are going extinct. We have to keep that alive so that we do not lose our language, because the language of indigenous people is our identity, and we have to preserve that. In conclusion, I want to wish and to acknowledge you, Minister Miller, for your work in bringing this policy and bringing this incredible day to us today. And it's something that I will remember, and we will all remember. For the coalition, it was no easy feat. And sometimes it seemed like we would never get the attention of the federal government. But you've made our day, and we look forward to getting out that collaborative work plan to make sure that the policy is preserved, protected, and implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Clayton. We will now begin the media Q&A portion of this event. To answer your questions, we have the speakers of the day, Presidents Couture and Clayton, Honorable Marc Miller, Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations, and we also have Jake Kennedy, Director General of Policy and Partnerships Branch, Implementation Sector, here to answer any technical questions. We'll begin with media attending virtually and then those joining in person. For those in person, I will ask you to line up at the microphone so that we can hear your questions through the feed. Please be sure to identify yourself and your media outlet. Veuillez vous identifier ainsi que les médias pour lesquels vous travaillez. We'll please start with one question and one follow-up, and if time allows, we'll take more. On va commencer avec une question et une question de suivi, et si on a assez de temps, on prendra plus de questions. For those joining us online, we'll start with you. Please raise your hand. We'll try again. For those joining online, any questions? Okay, we'll go over to those in the room. First question, please.
This is for Minister Miller. During Galling CTV News, this is a question from my colleague Creason. There was a memorandum of understanding today signed between the Wolaski First Nation and a forestry company in New Brunswick. The First Nation says it's a sign they can work with the provincial government in New Brunswick when it comes to land territory. What do you make of the memorandum of understanding announced today, and what would you say to the New Brunswick government given the state of relations lately between First Nations and the provincial government.
Yeah, and thanks for the question. I saw Creason's article online, so I haven't had a chance to review it in much detail. But it is, I think, what we tell business partners, particularly though, and there are ones that are leading the way in their engagement with Indigenous peoples, is that if you have a project that touches and concerns Indigenous peoples, and you can think you can get it done without talking to them, you should fire your lawyers. And that's, there are Supreme Court judgments that are paving the way, have paved the way, and are giving business, in particular those that want or they actually have to work with Indigenous peoples, a roadmap as to how to get to consent and collaboration and partnership. And they also provide the pathway of how to accept no for an answer. And so I'm happy about these types of announcements. The federal government has a relatively limited role to play in this context, but they are ones that are very important, particularly when you're working to uphold harvesting rights, whether it's hunting or forestry, which is integral to livelihoods of Indigenous peoples, but also very profound elements of identity. When it comes to the relationship with the New Brunswick government, and this is work that I have heard directly from Indigenous communities, particularly in the cancellation of some of their tax agreements, I don't think it should be lost on anyone that we're seeing a government that needs to be a little better engaged with Indigenous peoples and can't, in one fell swoop, cancel these agreements, and that is the nub of a lot of the discussions that we've had on revenue for communities that is, making a difference in people's lives, that, is in the tens of millions of dollars that could disappear overnight. So the New Brunswick government has to do a better job when it comes to their engagement with Indigenous peoples, or a couple things will happen. The courts are going to remind them pretty severely of that role, or communities are going to take a more forceful approach to their understanding of what self-determination means. And the role of the federal government is multifold in that one. It involves also, isn't limited to speaking publicly about it, but actually working in the background with the New Brunswick government, working with Indigenous communities to make sure that rights are respected.
Thank you. No follow-up.
Thanks.
Hi there, my name is Marcia from the Globe and Mail. I have another question for Minister Miller. With respect to the policy that was announced today, and specifically the part that talks about sort of, I guess I would say, increased accountability on deputy heads to make sure that modern treaties are being implemented, is there a stick or a carrot involved in that? Like, if, say, they don't take action to do that, whether it's their bonuses or performance reviews or that kind of thing?
Yeah, Marcia, that is a key question. I think there's a bit of both. You need a bit of carrot. You need a bit of stick in this. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, you have a series of modern treaties that we call modern treaties, but that have elements in them that need review or that need constant monitoring as part of, importantly in this day and age, the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So Canada can't get away with impunity every time it chooses or ignores, and I think the ignorance is a very active tool that's used not to actually get things done. And as President Clayton said, no one said this was going to be easy, but we certainly didn't have to make it harder in the first place. And I think that is, the challenge that they see when you have an independent public service, when you have governments, and it's not limited to the public service. It is doing a great job in a number of areas, but when it comes to relationships with Indigenous peoples, there's a lot of work to be done in creating that muscle memory that'll survive a government like ours, and actually have that memory within the government and the mechanism with which to interact on a daily basis. Like President Kutirk was sharing with me earlier, that you can't, it's very frustrating to have to spend hours on end re-educating people about the basic premises of the relationship that they should know about in the first place. It's also very frustrating at a ministerial level to be talking about particular clauses that should be instituted as a matter of muscle memory. So that, the government of Canada is far from guiltless in this, but having those elements in place, including a meeting with the Prime Minister, which is an accountability in and of it, mechanism in and of itself. It's not a photo op. Having a policy circle where, technicians and people with advanced knowledge of that relationship can get together and iron out throughout the various departments what work needs to be done and implemented is an actual key component of that. And then oversight. There have been various propositions from the coalition as to what that would look like, whether there is a mechanism of, I guess, naming and shaming within the Office of the Auditor General, which has its limits given the nature of that role, and making sure that the government is actually held to account. So, currently, and I'll take the example that we have talked about at a different table with the Inuit Crown Partnership. They have had to sue us at times on implementing, in our understanding of a particular provision clause of their agreement, which deals with something very profound in and around their language rights and how the federal government actually lives up to the promise that it made decades ago with respect to how Inuktitut is used by the federal government when it interacts with the Inuit. And that's as important to the actual black and white of the agreement as it is to the relationship that we purport to say to people is one that is modern in nature. And so they shouldn't have to sue us to get to somewhere where we should have been in the first place. And I think that can't be the only stick that's available, because far too often when you talk about rights, is it that much of a perfected right that you always have to go to the Supreme Court to enforce it? And so this isn't the be-all and end-all. And again, as President Clayton said, there is some hard work that will be involved in here, but it is a collaborative one where we are together at the table. I'm not talking about taking away the public services bonus. I have no power to do that, and I don't think it would necessarily be productive. But there are ways to make sure that these people that go to work every day to work with Indigenous peoples are living up to the expectations that are in the treaty.
And just my follow-up question is also for you, Minister. Obviously, we're here today talking about implementation challenges. I feel like sometimes that can be a bit of a vague word, and I'm wondering if you can help just explain for me, where you see the federal government is falling short specifically with respect to doing what the government said it would do.
Well, we have a short memory span, and it has nothing to do with electoral cycles. Often the pivotal point for us is actually getting to a modern treaty and signing it, and then patting ourselves in the back and walking away. And then the hard part is actually the implementation portion. So there are some outstanding issues under these relationships that have been dragging on, in some cases for leading up to half a century. And in some cases, ones that are the reflection of our modern relationship. So a couple specific examples. We spoke about language rights with respect to the Inuit. That is an ongoing pressing concern. Some more modern developments. I mean, these agreements were put into place with a set of parameters, and often, like I said earlier, our partners took a leap of faith in the federal government, but there were conditions that were Ottawa imposed in and around taxation, in and around language that in a modern context, despite the fact that we call these treaties modern, had to deal with cede and surrender of language, of land or rights, which is offensive in itself to Indigenous peoples. Those are currently embodied in some of those agreements, and we have moved to eliminate that language and to move to a more modern context where we can actually acknowledge our shared roles and responsibilities. But if that's driven by one politician in Ottawa, it's never actually going to get done in terms of getting the agreement updated to the modern context when it comes to Section 87 of the Indian Act specifically, and phasing out the requirement that we had for communities to tax their own people, which is not a nation-to-nation relationship, is not an efficient way of actually generating revenues that would be returned into the community. And then actually getting it done is something that where this type of policy and its implementation can have a seat that is much more effective within the public service than it is around a political table where that gets turned over every couple months or every couple of years. So those, I think the people to my right would it be better to talk about some of the frustrations towards the federal government. Those are sort of the ones that I see on a at my level, but there are probably many more that we could cite.
Hi, I'm Mateo Similero, National Observer. This is a question for Minister Miller, but if there are any thoughts, please jump in for comment. I'm really kind of intrigued by this language around living documents capable of evolving. Obviously you mentioned you shouldn't have to sue the government to get changes. I'm just wondering what kind of will the review processes of this implementation policy have that ability to change this language in some modern treaties? Like, what is going to be the function and operations of language shifts in the actual living documents?
It's an excellent question. A relationship is more than what's written on black and white, and oftentimes where we have some of the largest liabilities that we see in the federal government, financial in nature, are the actual black and white things. Set aside the spirit and intent of treaties for one moment, but some of the largest issues that we face in terms of financial liability are the actual black and white promises that the government of Canada has made over our entire existence that we have consistently failed. So what's written on the paper is important, but when we talk about a relationship, it can't be reduced to exchanges of papers. And some of the language and thinking and relationships do evolve. And so what I mentioned earlier to your colleague is a specific example of that. The language in some of these treaties has very offensive cede and surrender language, which at the very least the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples since 1996 has been telling us is not necessary to embody any sort of certainty within our relationships. No people's livelihoods are threatened by moving towards different types of language that would be more expressive of our relationship and the needs for Canada and the Indigenous communities in particular to have a sense of what their duties and roles and responsibilities are. Yet we've imposed those conditions, and they aren't ones, for example, those that are, there are some communities that want to enter into a more modern relationship, but they want to have nothing to do with this type of language, and they don't want to be forced to tax their own people, in those two specific examples that I gave. And so those all require us to sit down and have the actual space within government, and sometimes me having to return to cabinet to actually change the language, or having a space to actually have communities lined up and work with us in how they see the evolution of those treaties occur. And that is, that's tough work, but this forum and the reminder on every, I guess on a periodic occasion to be able to speak to the Prime Minister and remind him of that relationship also tends to focus the mind of a lot of us. So I see a lot of positive in this. And those particular examples are expression of that, but there may be other ones that we can't predict, particularly in the light of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, its implementation and the action plan that the Minister of Justice and I have to deliver over the next little while, which will inform a lot of this decision making.
And sorry in advance for this kind of winding question, but you speak a lot about muscle memory and kind of building up institutional knowledge so that there isn't a kind of re-education process when you go into meeting rooms. I've spoken with some critics of the kind of modern treaty process who kind of worry about municipalization, obviously the kind of institutional knowledge of the federal government right now, since Pierre Trudeau was the white paper and kind of concerns about kind of integration. Is there, and obviously, I'm making an assumption right now, but perhaps Chrétien signed treaties in his time in kind of late 90s, 2000s. I'm just wondering if there is kind of a concern within kind of central bureaucrats, upper managers that have a sort of kind of, maybe a little bit of a chauvinism or a worry that there is a kind of still not that equitable relationship. Is there a concern that some of kind of upper bureaucrats or leaders won't be on the same page with this policy?
I think, I'll try not to speak cryptically, but given the time it's taken, I think you can probably draw the conclusion that there are still people around that, through ignorance or otherwise or deliberation, don't have the interests of Indigenous peoples at heart. I have a lot of faith in Canadians and in seeing that there is a lot of importance in this country to make sure we are living up to what we see ourselves as a country. And I guess the cryptic thing I'll say is there certainly is a financial interest in this country in maintaining the status quo. And that's not acceptable, I think, to most Canadians. That takes expression in many forms, and it's something that you always have to fight back with in government. Is it necessarily nefarious or evil in nature all the time? Yes and no. There's a lot of people that, when fear is coupled with ignorance, you see it often expressed on people that are racialized or in Indigenous communities, and so that is the nature of systemic racism. It finds itself in sort of benign ways through various institutions of government. The Canadian government's not immune from that, and so this type of mechanism, this type of implementation, is something that will make sure that we have something robust that fights back against that. And it's incremental, and things take time. And to those people that criticize these, I'm not going to ever sort of pretend that people criticizing this have evil intents or necessarily are ignorant of what's going on. I think that robust criticism and opposition is very important at times for us to focus the mind and actually realize and make us force through the fact that we're doing good things. But the facts do count in this context, and working with the people to my right and the dozen or so communities, and as well as the 2 dozen or so communities, plus the ones that are looking at it and saying, do we enter into a modern treaty? What do we tell our people? What is the modern expression of our relationship? That takes a leap of faith. And if there's anything that we can learn through this, is that the trust remains thing, but you've got to keep building that trust. And in the specific portfolio that I have, a lot of that can't just be the Government of Canada stomping in and saying, we have this new great package for you, trust us, because we know that the consequences of that has been tried in the past with the repercussions that we still see today. So it's about trust and partnership. And for the area that I work with, that does cost a lot, are financial claims, actually paying decades-old bills that haven't been paid in the past, which, you wouldn't hang out with me if I owed you money, right? So that's kind of the institutional example of the way Canada has behaved in the past. And once you level that playing field and you talk from a position of respect, you can get somewhere. And where we got to today was something that is an expression of that, which is a policy that they've worked on for a really long time, and that there's no guarantees, but will work its way through the government and get our house in order.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Next question.
Fraser Neame from APTN. So for the minister, I think, but anyone can answer. But I think you touched upon it, but what we hear back is the frustration from Indigenous communities of just the sheer amount of time it takes to get to not only signing an agreement, but also the implementation. Is there, and often the communities actually know what they want is just dealing with these various levels of bureaucracy. Is there any way to speed up that process? As you say, it lasts through different, institutional knowledge is forgotten, governments change. Is there some way to make it more efficient, I suppose?
Yeah, and thank you, Fraser. Where we have the best relationship is, and because land is central to this discussion, because provincial responsibilities are also central to this discussion, where we have the most progress is in British Columbia, where we have a tripartite mechanism to actually work with communities that want to move towards a modern treaty relationship. We've seen the limitations of that at the same time. These are matters of rights, respect, and dignity, but also very concrete discussions in and around land, and in some cases treaty land entitlements, issues in and around rights, fishing rights, which are at the forefront of this, particularly on the West Coast, but across Canada, and matters that deal with how we take the levels of government together and move them, and it's been really slow to get to a point where a community is going to put their trust in us and enter into a modern treaty. In the last 4 or 5 years, and it's been slow as heck, but we've been able to break down a lot of policy barriers. I mentioned Section 87 of the Indian Act on taxation. That was a huge breakthrough for a number of communities that are sort of sitting on the sidelines saying, we will never impose taxation on our own people, especially if you tell us to do so, because that, is the story of a lot of people that see this as a municipalization, which is an unfair characteristic, but we play into that narrative. This is about communities that are taking a leap of faith and putting their trust in Canada. And so trying to fit a square peg into a round hole is totally unproductive. And that is, I think, why it takes so long. And it's why there aren't more people that are at the table with us, because they are not willing to compromise some very core things that we've not been able to move on. We've cleared a lot of brush in the last couple of years. And these are conversations that I have specifically because we're talking often about British Columbia with Minister Rankin. But there are glimmers of hope across the country, including in Quebec, where I hope we are close to a breakthrough, which would be the first in 45 years if things work out. So there's a few things on the horizon, but they do need to accelerate. It shouldn't be lost on anyone that you still need intervention at the highest level, but where we do see things working better, particularly in British Columbia, is where it has been institutionalized, and there are parallel lines of communication between the public service. So you can talk about fisheries items together, you can talk about issues related to national defense, you can talk about issues related to land, and those are things that if you don't have that sort of institutional working relationship, it'll take much more time because it'll depend on the whim of any politician of the day.
We're nearing the end of the event. Just going back to those joining us virtually, last chance to raise your hand if you have a question. Okay. President Co-Chair and President Clayton, would you like to offer closing remarks or reflections? Only if you want to.
Thank you. I just want to thank Minister Miller for inviting President Kochik and myself to this press conference. It is indeed a very happy day for us because the question that was asked about the modern day treaties, the LCAC and the SGIGs, we get together on an annual basis, leadership to leadership, to provide updates to the membership, as well as to walk together with our federal treaty partner, because it's important to build those relationships. It's important to build important and very important work that has to be done. And there's more work on the horizon with this new policy. There are many people out there in general, in the public, that really don't understand who the LCAC is. We try to get the information out on our website. There are many people in the Canadian society that really don't understand modern day treaties. And I think it's important for us as we move forward that educational piece will come out and will arise out of this implementation policy, because implementation is key to all of the treaties, especially if commitments were made in the various provisions of those treaties. How are they supposed to be implemented? Who's going to be doing the implementation? That kind of thing. That was a question that was asked. This is why the implementation policy is so important to the LCAC. So thank you, Minister, for inviting us here.
This now concludes this press conference. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Minister Miller, President Clayton, President Co-Chair, Elder Commander, and Elder Sirkor. Ceci conclut cette conférence de presse. Miigwech, Kuyanamek, Marcy, merci, thank you.